Okay, thank you all for staying for this final keynote. I know we're all very excited to hear what our last speaker has to share with us. I'm Abbie Liel, I'm a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm very pleased to introduce my friend and mentor, Dimitrios Vamvatsikos. Dimitrios was born in Greece, and having an intense interest in math and physics, he enrolled at NTU in Athens and graduated with a diploma in civil engineering. He then moved to California and Stanford University, where he earned a geomechanics master's degree in 1998 and studied probabilistic methods, hazard estimation, and seismic performance of structures for his PhD, which he earned in 2002. After graduating, he participated in various research projects in Greece, ranging from modal identification and Bayesian model updating for bridges to modeling older reinforced concrete buildings. In 2005, he was appointed as a lecturer at the University of Cyprus, teaching design of steel structures and earthquake engineering. And since 2011, he has been on the faculty of the Metal Structures Laboratory at the National Technical University of Athens, specializing in static and dynamic analysis of steel structures. Dimitrios' research vision is focused on integrating structural modeling, computational techniques, probabilistic concepts, and experimental results into a coherent framework for performance evaluations of structures. He's interested in almost every topic that has been covered in this conference, from seismic hazard to modeling, analysis and design, especially of steel and monumental structures, nonlinear static and dynamic analysis, and seismic performance. I first came to know Professor Vamvatsikos through his work on incremental dynamic analysis, and the really transformative power of incremental dynamic analysis is it really enabled us as a group to leverage advances in computational power, the performance-based earthquake engineering framework to really assess performance probabilistically. I would say that the paper, especially the one applied incremental dynamic analysis that Dimitrios published in Earthquake Spectra, is one of my favorite papers of all time, partially because of incremental dynamic analysis, but mostly because of the clarity with which he presents his work and how usable and accessible and understandable the work is. Since that time, I've gotten to know him personally, and I think you will not find a more genuinely kind and intellectually honest person. And so with that, I'm really pleased to introduce Professor Vamvatsikos to the stage.
Hello, this is the part where we press start and hopefully it works. Yes. Yeah, a little bit of a disclaimer first. That's not the original title. That's the, let's say, the kosher title to get you to be here and pretend this is a little bit more technical than it is. You see, you got your keynote lectures starting with Bomer, Julian Bomer. You got your Ellen Rothschild, so you got your scientific talks. I'd say you got your history talks with Jack Maley, Steve Kramer. You got a bit of biology, human hormones, and motivational with, well, you know, Ashraf. I'd say I'm more of the comedic entertainment startup act, so that's the actual title. Because it's all about grandmas, tomatoes, and theoretically how these apply to earthquake engineering and selecting intensity measures. Apologies if you're in any way allergic to tomatoes, just focus on the red coloring, that's all. Now, a tribute to grandmas everywhere. It doesn't matter how you call them. Nonna, giagia, abuella, meemaw. I'm a big fan of Young Sheldon, by the way, or obaasan. When it comes to cooking, grandma always knows best, and even if she doesn't, she actually does. It's a universal truth. Sorry for that. That's how it works. And the reason she's the best is she knows how to pick the best ingredients. And by that, why should somebody like an earthquake or risk engineer settle for less when it comes to his job? So as a tribute to Milano, wonderful city, and of course, La Nonna and everybody's grandma, let us consider cooking Italian style. Now, the mission. There's always has to be a mission, and that's the case here. we're gonna go for the perfect pizza margherita. Really wanna go for, if you're not sure of what it is, it's a divine culinary delight. I just love it. And it requires the perfect ingredients to get it right. For perfectly honest, the Neapolitans do claim to be the best in this, but still, it's Italy, so we just bag it up all together. Flour, mozzarella, olive oil, and our own focus for today is gonna be tomatoes. And not just any, it's gonna be the best, because it's gotta be the best. And the Italians and the seismic risk analysts, they know there are two ways to get them. You either go conditional or you go non-conditional. Now, let's try the non-conditional approach. That'll be our first journey into something slightly more technical. You need a field, you need cows, an olive grove, and a garden, tomato garden. You gotta grow the wheat, you gotta make it flour, you gotta make the cows, you gotta make mozzarella, you gotta pick the olives, squeeze that oil out of them, grow the tomatoes, do a good job, you will get the perfect ingredients. You just need to wait for a year or so. That's gonna be the trouble. Now, if you're in a hurry, what your average grandma will do, you will take her with you, take you to the market. She's gonna take you to the top vendors. You know how it works, right? The top vendors know the grandma knows them. They cater to her every needs. She will buy the perfect ingredients, the ones that are in the back, you know, the good stuff, not for the other customers. And she'll be done in an hour or so. She'll go back home, cook the best. But how does she choose? Let us just focus on one precious ingredient just to expedite this discussion. And of course, that's gonna be tomatoes. That's the one ingredient to rule them all, the one to find them, the one ingredient to bring them all, and in the oven, bind them. My precious tomato. You can actually inscribe this on a ring and rule the world of risk, but before you go there, how do you get the best, the most precious of tomatoes? And let's not go too far, because just a few decades ago, on a planet not very far away, tomatoes actually had flavor. That's a personal complaint. I apologize for inserting it in here, but they actually had flavor. We had a couple of types, right? There was not much of a variety there, but they had real taste. And now we have plenty. I got the cherries, date, green, yellow. I even heard purple tomatoes out there. And most of them taste like paper. Is it our highest standards? Is it Instagram? Is it the worst product? I don't know. But it's something that needs to be addressed, and hopefully I'll do something about it. Now, meet Marco. This is Marco. He's a trusted vendor. He knows grandma. He's got his cherry tomatoes, his bright colored tomatoes, his shiny tomatoes. He's got his large tomatoes. And you need to choose. Marco has every kind of tomato, but how do you pick the best for your pizza? Well, if you're an Instagrammer, you have to go for the large and shiny ones. They kind of show up better on screen. If you're Scrooge McDuck, you're gonna go for the cheap ones, because money matters. But Nonna, the grandma, she knows there is one rule only, and one it is. You pick the tomatoes that make the food taste the best. Why do we think it's different for seismic risk? Now, let's look at our approaches. Remember, non-conditional, conditional. Look them, take them out one again. You need, again, seismic source models for seismic risk. You need earthquake catalogs. You need ground motions. You have to generate a stochastic event set to go non-conditional with 10 or 100,000 earthquakes, simulating many years in the process. You need to select or generate ground motions to match said events. You have to analyze your structure for 10,000 or 100,000 motions, post-process the results to get mean rates of loss and failure. And of course, either you have a supercomputer or you wait for a year or so to finish the calculations. Not bad, but a little bit expensive and troublesome. Now, if you want to go conditional, you take Nonna with you and you go to your seismologist. You ask for a probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. You accept only the best IM from your seismologist for your study. You select records to match your intensity measure, and your site, you analyze the structure, and you post-process. You'll be done in a few hours, and that's precious. But the problem is that you're now stuck with choosing an IM. How do you choose one? And that's the problem. Now, a few decades in a university, that was actually the other side of the ocean, intensity measures were proposed. Back in that day, we only had one or two types. It was PGA, maybe PGV, spectral acceleration, and they tasted perfect. Good times. Now we have plenty. You got average SA, FIV3, Arias intensity, specific energy density, cumulative absolute velocity, and that's just a few, as many more, which I probably cannot even pronounce. And I'd say at best our taste buds are kind of confused. Which one is the best? Do we have higher standards now and it's troublesome to choose? Is it the worst product? I don't think so. So many people have been trying on this, they've been working. What is it? Well, meet Marco Pagani. This is maybe after a bit of tanning, but this is our trusted seismology, Marco Pagani. Love the guy, hey Marco. And he's got average SA, he's got your PGAs, he's got your spectral accelerations, he's got your cumulative absolute velocities, and they're all top product. He guarantees that personally. But which one do you choose? Now, how do you choose an intensity measure? Well, Marco has many intensity measures. He's careful. He uses the best GMPs, ground motion prediction equations, ground motion models. But how, you have to guide him, you have to help him out. How do you pick the best for your risk analysis? Well, let's talk with Professor A. He says, get the one that is best correlated with the response of the structure you're interested in. Professor B might say, get the one that is least dependent on magnitude and distance, so you avoid issues of bias down the line. But Nonna, the famous Nonna, she knows there is one rule only, just one rule. You pick the intensity measure that makes the analysis taste better, be more accurate. But first, before I go there, a bit of a background. Now, to understand the whole problem, you gotta meet the pioneers. Let me become a little bit of Jack Maley here. That Liel has shown in 2000. He did, in my opinion, the first seminal full study of alternative IMs on an actual model, top to bottom. That Nico Luco, 2001, he delayed a little bit publishing that paper, but it got out in 2007. Bad boy. He formalized efficiency and sufficiency, basic criteria for selecting ground motion, intensity measures. That'd be Alan Cornell, the man with a plan. And that'd be Paul Cordova. That's the one guy who's blissfully unaware that this is happening behind his back. He's run into profession now, and every time I confront him and tell him, you know, that thing you did back in 2001, we just love it. He says, really? That was the easiest paper of my life. Like, yeah. Of course, Greg Dearline, Sami Mehani, and Alan again, they proposed the first geo-mean combination of spectral accelerations, which was fantastic. And right about now is the time I tell you about the man. That'd be C. Alan Cornell. C has to remain a circuit. He never really liked his first name. And all of this is his fault, because he pretty much brought up the subject. And when I cracked my first joke, pun intended, inside a paragraph, he said, well, if the editor lets it pass, I'll accept it. So he never really toned down my flair, so you get to get the full dose today. Contrary to popular opinion, Alan did not have all the answers, but he had all the right questions. He actually did. And I have to admit, he knew where the answers were kind of hiding. He knew where to look for them. And I have to say, I really, really, really miss the guy, because he was generous with that stuff, and he gave it to everybody. So, back to technical stuff. What does not work that well? Stuff that is based on linear regression. Now, anything based on the linear regression can be flawed. Why? Because there is a fitted model behind. To give you an idea, the classic approach is you look at EDP, that would be demand parameter, response, interstory drift, peak flow acceleration, you name it. You look at your intensity measure, you fit a line through that, typically in log-log space. For example, you start looking at things that could be useful to understand the relationship of the two. You could be looking at the correlation, the slope, R square, meaning the fitness, the error, the standard deviation of the residuals. All of those, unfortunately, depend on fitting a linear model to a basically nonlinear function. What you see there is a very classic bad example of this fit. Meaning that you have troubles with collapse. Anything that collapses doesn't appear there, so you start getting into issues. And of course, there will always be cases where it works. Things are sort of linear, and cases where it doesn't. So right away, I'm just going to dispense with this and go to the next one. Now, that does not mean that linear regression-based criteria are useless, okay? I'm not going to trash like half the profession here. They're kind of useful in some cases. For example, you look at the dispersion of the residuals, that's not a very bad way to judge efficiency. Actually, that's the way it was done originally. Correlation R-squared criteria are quite useful if your plan is to do, let's say, cloud-based analysis, fit a linear model, which, by the way, is the way ESRM, the European Seismic Risk Model, was done, a la giagia and Cornell, 2009. But if you do not need the linear model basis, you will get a stronger basis for your testing, and you will get a better way to say that I've done a good test, and my assumptions and my results hold. Another way, it's better if you let go, and even though it is attractive in many ways, for example, it gives you one single answer of an entire IMEDP raise. It just says one answer. Is it good? Is it bad? There are better ways to go about it. I'll just show you an example here. What you're seeing here is a case where we have a rocking block, and we're checking at different intensity measures to look at it. There are cases like the cumulative absolute velocity where you're excluding stuff that is not enough to rock the block that is working very, very well to fit a linear model. There are others where peak ground velocity works very well, but in many of those, you see horrible, horrible fitting, and it's the fitting that is driving the problem, not the actual intensity measure itself. So, what works? Let's focus on the good stuff. IM-based efficiency, and that's the stuff I love. In the end, all you care about is the distribution of the demand given the intensity. Or if you will, equivalently, I'd say the distribution of the intensity given a damage threshold, a demand threshold, meaning fragility. At the very basic, fragility is a median and dispersion, the log-normal approach, and minimizing this dispersion, that's the goal. It improves fidelity, it reduces uncertainty, it reduces the numbers of nonlinear response history analysis you need to run, and if you don't go the regression way, you can still do it, but it's very, very useful if you look at things ADP basis. So, follow the fragility, and as Helmut Krabinkel used to say, you go vertical. Here is a, okay, I know, it's an incremental dynamic analysis plot. My students are used to those. You can get horizontal statistics, as Helmut would say, meaning you drive a straight line, you look at the points that you intersect, and then you look at the response of this problem. You're missing a lot of records. Why? Because of collapses. They don't exist. If you go high enough, you get what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 records, all sorts of trouble. You go vertical, that's no problem. You hit a bunch of points every time, one per record. You look at the statistics of that, and it's actually the statistics that drive the fragility. That's a great idea. And, by the way, if you shift this line left and right, you can start looking at results that are valid, let's say, for the elastic range, around the yielding area, the chaos of the yielding area, the peak, post-peak, close to collapse. Meaning you can look at how your intensity measure works at various ranges of behavior. Oops, wrong one. Here's an example of a 4-story building with an interstory drift-based fragility. In this case, you can see on the left, this is the dispersion that is plotted along the vertical axis. And on the left, you can see the chaos that happens close to yielding. A lot of intensity measures kind of work worse at that area, getting even 50% dispersions. And close to collapse, fun enough, because of elongated modes and the building sliding into a mode of vibration that's kind of easier. Okay, in this case, I'm using vibration and modes of vibration very loosely. Damage has settled in. Things are kind of more relaxed in the way they work and more explainable. All intensity measures kind of improve how they behave. And you can see this way. Here's another case of the same four-story building. In this case, we're looking at peak floor acceleration. Why peak floor acceleration? Because you want to do loss of contents as well, right? And in this case, you see the unbelievable chaos that happens at 0.5 G of peak floor acceleration, because all kinds of higher modes are coming into play when you're looking at local effects, even on a four-story. And then, as your building starts getting into damage, softening a bit, the peak floor acceleration saturate, and now, actually, all your intensity measures work very well. Some better than others, especially combinations of spectral acceleration values, in this case, work very, very well. But you can tell that something is changing. Something is going to be better in the higher range of response, something is going to be better in the lower one. Here's another example, rocking blocks. You see 6 rocking blocks, starting from very slender and tall and going to smaller ones. And what you're seeing here is the, well, not so obvious at first, but on the left side, you see the onset. That's where it starts to rock. It just starts to rock and starts to uplift. And that is the area where the red line, the peak ground acceleration, is at its best. Why? Because it's the one that tells you precisely the time when, let's say, an idealized rigid body starts uplifting. So it works fantastically. Of course, if you go close to collapse, close to overturning in this case, it's actually peak ground velocity and combinations of spectral acceleration values that work a lot better. And you can even get down to, for this very chaotic problem, to 30% dispersions, which is really, really nice. And of course, if somebody was to say what's the best overall, and not bad idea that even Marco Pagani would like, is the PGV. That'd be the green line. A pretty basic, simple ground motion intensity measure that can cover with reasonable accuracy most of the range, left going to right. And this is the kind of images and kind of visualization of optimality that's pretty nice. Now, here is the heavy stuff, sufficiency. Sufficiency is the part where you're looking at what is your dependence on characteristics of the earthquake, of the record, such as magnitude, distance, directivity, etc. And this was introduced by Luke and Cornell, kudos, and this is actually an image I stole from their own paper. The idea is that your distribution has to be independent of other characteristics. Why? Because if you're not accounting for them, you're going to be biased. And for example, magnitude distance, duration, pulse period, flinch step, the rate of change of the predominant frequency, the shoe size of your seismologist. And remember, those guys are a sneaky bunch. Every couple of years, they will come up with a new something, intensity something, that you need to account for and be sure that you're sufficient against that. So it kind of makes it into a kind of a long chase, a never-ending game sometimes. My preference, if I need to do sufficiency, is to still go vertical. In this case, for example, I will get the IM points, I will fit a linear regression model with all the troubles that it brings in, and in this case, you're seeing magnitude and joiner boot distance. You gotta select the confidence level, that's also another tricky part, and you need to test the statistical significance of the fit. In the left, on your left, you're gonna be seeing a case where the slope is pretty large, and it's quite obvious that you have dependence, in this case, to magnitude, because high magnitudes, let's say 6s on the left versus 7s and 7.5s, that's a big difference. You cannot ignore that. On the right, you'll see that joiner boot distance, in this case, doesn't matter. Slope is kind of flat. You can ignore that safely. So that's a pretty good case that for this one, which is actually the collapse of a rigid block, the overturning, magnitude matters when you're using peak ground acceleration as the IM. Now, let us dissect this a little bit more. It's all about variance and bias. Variance is the extra noise when you're measuring response. For example, on the top, you're seeing a distribution of response. In one case, you get high variance. The other case, you get low variance. It's tighter, around your best estimate. If the same as grandma sent you for tomatoes on your own, theoretically you learn how to do it by now, you go to Marco in general, and you bought the right kind. But some are large, some are small, some are fresh, some are kind of mature. They're not consistent enough, they're not nearby, they're very variable. Essentially, you miss the center of response, you're biased. You'll be biased. Now, bias is the other case. That's where you're missing the center of response, and the easier one is to look at no bias, you're getting close to your estimate, you're rightly centered. In the one that is dashed on the bottom, you see some heavy overprediction. This is where you aimed, this is where you got. It's like you went back to Marco and you brought to your grandma the completely wrong kind of tomatoes, the ones that taste like paper for the food she's preparing. They're useless. Variance essentially needs more measurements to be taken care of, and that is doable. I could get more and more and more measurements or more and more tomatoes, and of those I can pick the ones I need and kind of tighten up and make a better food. But bias, you cannot fix it easily. That is the general idea. Now, the fun part about this is that IM sufficiency is different. And here's how it's different. In general, bias is a very tough nut to crack, but the question is, do you need to go after it when you're looking at intensity measures? Most, for example, let's look at structural models, and someone in the audience may be Dimitrios Vamvatsikos, who really knows about that stuff, where he will tell you that a steel frame model to be properly modeled and run, and your computer model to match the response, you need to run a shake table test. You need to be able to verify components with component testing. You need to verify the full-scale 3D structure, hello defense, F center, and you need to be able to say that, yep, what I modeled and what I have on the field, they match. The question is, do you need shake table calibrated models to select an intensity measure? And the fun part is, you probably don't, because everybody is using simple single degree of freedoms and multi-degree of freedoms, so they must be knowing something there. The reason is that you're not comparing against the real world where you need the experiments. You're playing inside the virtual computer game right now. You're in the game, you're running analysis, and you're comparing analysis to analysis. So, let's say you wanted to check magnitude. Let's say you got a bag, and you put in there NGA West 2, NGA East, Orpheus, KNet, KickNet, all the records you wanted. Just take them all. Split them in 5 bins of magnitude. Let's say M1 is the lowest one, M5 is the highest one, and then 1 and 5, I'm just saying, just generic set descriptions. Assess the response per bin through your structural model, let's say D1 to D5. These bins actually contain all the data in your virtual experiment that you want to check. They have everything there. Everything is there. You run everything available. It's just a matter of choosing or weighting properly the right bins. Let me make this clearer just to be fair to everybody. Before record selection, here's what happened. You got your 5 bins of response, and they were arbitrarily weighted because that's what we had back then. You put weights of W1 to W5, by the way, which meant essentially how many records you picked from each bin, which was kind of random quite often. Then you combine them all together, and you got your biased distribution, unless you're really lucky. You got your biased distribution of response. But the true response is in there. It's not absent, it's in those same 5 bins. It's just hiding. You didn't choose the right weights. That's all. It's not somewhere in an alien in the real world where you need a shake table test, for example, to uncover it. It's in there. You already have it. You just haven't used it properly. Now, there's no need of a divine intervention. It's all there. And what it needs is hazard-consistent record selection. You select the weights according to contributing events. Of course, the disaggregation is what covers you and what guides you to be able to pick those scenarios and the appropriate weights. The response distribution now is consistent with hazard at your site. Unfortunately, you have to do it per site. And now you converge to the unbiased version. Same records, same input results, just a matter of reweighting. Even with an insufficient intensity measure, it still works. Thank you, Jack Baker, Ting Lin, Brendan Brandley, and everybody else working on this, because before 2013 or something, that was not available. Now, we got it. Now, dispersion is the key. An inefficient IM has high dispersion. That'd be your little blobs on the left. An efficient IM shrinks the dispersion, puts those bins closer together. Selecting bad weights with an efficient IM will still lead to bias, okay? Let's not be, doing a pipe dream here. It's gonna be still biased because the effect of, for example, magnitude was not removed in some way. But now it's constrained in a smaller interval, and the more efficient the IM, the tighter the interval where you're working with. With enough records, remember, if you have enough records, 1,000, you will even be able to detect, with a very tight dispersion, you will still be able to see significance, statistical significance. You will still be able to say that magnitude is statistically significantly an issue and your IM is insufficient. But the question is, does it matter? And then we have to turn to tomatoes for the rescue once more. Tomatoes, I don't know if you follow the medical journals or if you follow, the general results about medicine and what you eat, and eating tomatoes is good for you. Okay, that's a universal truth. It reduces cancer risk. And I'm just saying this, look at Schoenfeld and Ioannidis. There is an actual paper on this. The name of the paper actually is Everything We Eat Associated with Cancer, a systematic cookbook review. Hundreds of the citations, excellent paper. There is a meta-analysis of proper randomized testings, where they got tens and twenties and hundreds of thousands of samples with proper medical testing, properly done, of how people who ate a lot of tomatoes or very few did in life. And there is unambiguous statistical evidence that tomatoes reduce the risk for some cancers, especially gastrointestinal. No joke. Thank you, Greek salads. Go for it. It's vacation time pretty soon. Use it. But you have to be careful of the size of this effect. The statistical significance is not the same as engineering, as practical significance. And to give you an understanding, if you have a large enough sample, hundreds of thousands, you can detect all kinds of statistically significant differences. For example, if you go to CERN in Geneva, they can detect minute differences in the mass of the particles, fundamental particles of the universe. But they need billions of particle collisions to be able to do that. They can detect them, they can figure it out. The tomato effect on cancer is so small that you need tens and hundreds of thousands of samples to be able to figure it out. Actually, those guys, Ioannidis, Schoenfeld, they found out that you need about 10 to 20 kilos of tomatoes per day for a 2 to 3% reduction in your cancer risk. So it's there, but who cares? You can also see some health problems if you do eat that many tomatoes. Just saying. Now, the same exact concept applies to earthquakes. In this case, we have 3 different sites in Turkey. That'd be Istanbul, Ankara, Erzincan. And you got your hazard in average SA and SAT1, 2 competing intensity measures. Thanks, by the way, to Moson Kohrangi for these really nice plots. And here is some site-specific interstory drift fragilities. On the left, you're seeing SAT1. On the right, you're seeing average SA. The building fragilities are very clearly site-dependent. The pink one, the magenta one, is Erzincan. The red one is Istanbul, and the blue one is Ankara. They're as far as possible because the sites are very different. By the way, we also use the standard FEMA P695 set. I know we did IDA for that, what can I say? No record selection or nothing. And it just happens to coincide with Erzincan. Why? Because we just randomly got the P695 set, and apparently those records, they seem to rhyme better with a higher intensity, the higher seismicity of Erzincan. You switch to a better IM, and you get tighter distribution, everything closer together, but the same problem. If you look at it, you look a little bit closely, you will still see that the FEMA P695 set and IDA applied on it still matches very nicely with Erzincan. And again, Ankara is on the right, the blue one, and Istanbul, the red one, is somewhere in the middle. But who cares? They're so close together that doesn't matter for engineers. Now, in my opinion, and that's the whole theme of the tomato lecture, efficiency traps sufficiency. Do you care about bias in a 15% dispersed sample? If they gave me 15% error in my engineering calculations, there'd be fireworks happening around here. No, by the way, if you know that your data already contains the center of the distribution, and this is the unique case of the IM problem. It's not the case for other problems. And whatever residual error is there, it will be taken care of by site-specific, hazard-consistent record selection. I got my back covered. So, a little bit side here. If the record selection is king, why would I still care about efficient testing measures? Well, nothing is perfect. Even selection, if I give you a really, really bad IM with a lot of distribution, I give selection a lot of a wide margin to make errors, because nothing is perfect. There are still some assumptions there, some models, joint log normality, for example, correlation models. If those are imperfect, your selection will be imperfect, and in the end, you'll be giving yourself more margin to see the effect and not allow it to do its job right. Choose a good IM, you tighten up your troubles into a small interval, and then it works its magic even better. That's the idea. Now, the recipe. And there has to be a recipe. There has to be a recipe. We have to really promote something here, and here it is. First, select a broad sample of ground motions. Make it broad. Don't give me 30, 100, 200. Go for it. Make sure they have magnitudes, a lot, distances, whatever you need to check for. Directivity? Sure. Put stuff with pulses inside. Use a model that incorporates salient characteristics of the structure. This may be simple if you have a frame, a very complicated frame versus a simple frame is not a problem, but if you're looking at, let's say, I don't know, a nuclear power plant, you can have the couple of million degree of freedom model and the simpler one. As long as your model incorporates the silent characteristics, meaning higher modes, cyclic and in-cyclic degradation, all its things that it should be sensitive in, you should be fine. If it's missing important stuff, you're in trouble. And by the way, no shake table testing is needed here. You run your ground motions using IDA. I had to put that in somewhere. So there it goes. Check the dispersion of IM given EDP for all your important EDPs, and that's important. Don't just go for the global ones unless you really just need, I don't know, roof drift. Check interstory drift, check peak floor accelerations, check whatever matters for you. I don't know if it's energy strain or cumulative energy in some spots because that's what you use to assess losses down the line. Well, check those. You're going to be needing them down the line. That's it. And of course, then you pick the one IM that does best at minimizing the important dispersions. Pick the IM that works better for you to assess the risk. Pick the most tasty one. And then you can go to infinity and beyond. Yes? To the perfect job. Now, some disclaimers do apply. I don't know if you were in the first lecture. Remember that guy sitting on a similar spot with a pink shirt, white jacket, posh British accent? Julian Bomer fellow? Yeah, that guy. Do you remember him complaining about M mean and M max? Yeah, those issues kind of apply here as well. Remember he was saying that if you go for a very high max magnitude, you're going to be including a lot of extremes that maybe you don't need. If you're going to go for a very low magnitude minimum level, you're going to be including a lot of non-damaging earthquakes that you also don't need. It's this exact same discussion here. I did say use a broad set, right? But if you make your broad set go from magnitude 2 to magnitude 8, you're going to be including extremes that you don't need. And that's going to lead you completely astray. You're going to be, for example, unless you have like, I don't know, unless you're in Chile, close to subduction zone, Seattle, anybody, just don't include very high magnitudes. That's it. If you don't have like really weak structures, I don't know, some of those in Groningen seem pretty bad, you really don't need the small magnitudes. You can go 4.5 and above. Go for the big ones. Go for the ones that give you damage. Go where the data is that actually drives your risk. Don't look elsewhere. And the same goes for distance, directivity, pulses, no pulses, whatever you want. Very simple. Now, extra caveats, for example, you into nuclear power plants, maybe you don't need the broad set. The kind of money that goes into doing a proper seismic risk assessment of a nuclear power plant are such that you don't really need to go abroad, go broad, and go looking at every possible ground motion. Those guys are looking at ergodic ground motion models. They're looking at tight distributions of magnitude distances because they want to do a good job for those. You might as well use the same because you're doing a very focused study with enough resources to get your own nice little specific IM that works for it. Why not? Use that. So, that's pretty much all, folks. But, you see, whenever you finish something at this very nice, highly important conference and you're very happy about it, there's got to be an Oscar speech. So I may have finished, but actually I have not finished. Because I got people to thank. And that'll be the organizing committee, because they came into this with their eyes open. They kind of knew what was happening. It's just that Rui Pino very nicely told me, Dimitrios, if you can possibly keep it a little bit kosher, at least at the title level, maybe we don't drive people away before it's finished. Thank you. Good suggestion. There's also funding. We need to bow to our funders. We love them. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, there's the people who actually did the job that I'm showing here. You know, it's really nice at the age of 50 to orchestrate things, and you can use the stuff they do. In this case, I have to say, giants with broad shoulders, that's where we step on. Really lovely people. Thank you. Overworked doctors, Dinos, Vasilis, Nancy, Zacharias, Sarvalis, Akrivi, she cannot be here, unfortunately. The overburdened soon-to-be doctors, Dimitris, Nikos, and Evdoxia, and Angeliki. The youngsters wetting their feet and thinking they can become doctors one day. Why not? Angelos, Adam, Victor. And of course, Paolo Bazuro, Mosako Hranki, Andreas Pilatura for pretty much generating a lot of those figures you saw earlier and giving me unbelievable help. Ilias Dimitrakopoulos, he was the rocking star, by far. So all the rocking stuff you saw, huge help. And of course, you ladies and gentlemen, because you kind of stayed up fairly late. Thank you for being here.
So I have the pleasure of presenting Dimitrios with this gift from the conference organizing committee. Thank you, Dimitrios.
Thank you very much. Can I get off the stage now, Rui? This is really choreographed, guys. I think there's a closing ceremony about to happen, so don't disappear.